Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to discuss a few updates from Kiev. According to information we have, some Western sources confirmed that as a result of yesterday's Kinzhal strikes, the Russians managed to destroy another Patriot system that was a supply sent to Ukraine from Germany. We discussed this yesterday, but today we got some confirmation from independent sources. Very interesting video is coming from the western part of Ukraine. This is not about casualties, this is about casualties, but this is not about the situation on the ground. If you have access to the map, you will be able to take a look at this video in the western part of Ukraine. What is this video about? On this video we can see a meeting in some Ukrainian village where people were trying to decide how to live in the village. Maybe they were trying to discuss some local taxes or maybe some costs or prices. At some moment this small apartment entered this guy. This in the central part of the video. Who is this guy? I don't know. He's not like a terrorist. He is like he's the neighborhood. He's the neighbor of these people. And at some point of the situation, he took off from his pocket grenades, real combat grenades. And we will not watch this video till the end. And this man started dropping these grenades on the ground. Basically he dropped up to 3 grenades and then there was explosions, and imagine yourself what happened next with all these people. So what is this video about? This is not about I don't know, the guy or grenades. This is about the exhausted. People are exhausted in Ukraine. People are tired in Ukraine. People had some sickness with their brains because maybe they lost their belief. Maybe they don't believe anymore, not just in Zelensky, in victory. Maybe they don't even believe in their own God or of the territory they live in. The situation is very difficult, and to tell the truth, I'm not sure where exactly the Ukrainians are going right now. And according to information we have, there was a poll between Ukrainians, and as a result of that poll, a lot of Ukrainians, a majority of Ukrainians voted for stopping this war, even if it requires to give some territory to Russia. Now let's move to the south. Let's start from Kherson direction. According to information we have, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation provided us the numbers for the previous week, and the most important interesting number for me is the number of boats that were destroyed during the previous week. And according to the Ministry of Defense, the Russians managed to destroy 17 boats that Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces on the Russian bank of the river. If we compare the number with the previous week, the 2 weeks ago, for the second week, the Ukrainians lost 21 boats. So we see that a little bit less. But even though, regardless the numbers, the Russians still control the situation. The Russians still have possibilities to destroy Ukrainian forces that can be sent on the Russian bank of the river. The Russians were using not just attacks against boats. The Russians continue bombardment of this territory using FAB 500 and FAB 1500. And now we're moving to Zaporozhye area. As we discussed, as a result of clashes in this area, the Russians managed to improve their positions on this territory. We start receiving more and more updates from Robotine, and the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to get this red line. So they're like on the edge positions, and obviously the Russians soon will launch a real ground operation inside of Robotine. Right before I start making this video, we got another video from Robotine. I haven't added to map. I took a decision to use this for the next update. But the thing is that the Russians established full fire control over the village. The Ukrainians currently can't feel themselves safe in this area, and I expect that soon the Russians will launch a ground operation. They're not going to do this this year, let's say by the end of 2023, because as we know, the next votings, the next discussions of the military aid to Ukraine is going to take part in January. So obviously the Russians will keep the situation till January, and obviously the Russians Russians will try to capture or return control over Robotine before the next votings in the United States Senate about the Ukrainian military aid. And if the Russians are able to capture before the votings, obviously the Ukrainians will have less chances to get military aid from the United States of America. Now we are moving to South Donetsk direction, and we have also lots of very interesting updates from Marinka and from Mykolaivka. As we discussed, most of the mappers have already updated their map, showing that the Russians currently located on the edge positions of the eastern part of the village, yet we haven't received any geolocation whether the Russians started ground operation inside of the village or not, but I'm sure that the Russians are not in a hurry. They need to dig in deeper, they need to create a stable supply roads, to suppress Ukrainian FPV drone positions, to suppress Ukrainian artillery, and after that the Russians will launch the ground operation. We got one geolocation from this territory. On this video you can see how the Russians were using TOS flamethrower systems on Ukrainian edge positions inside of the village. Anyway, we can start counting days when the Russians will launch the final ground operation, and obviously in comparison with Robotine, this operation is going to take part this year. Now we're moving to Marinka. We have a lot of very interesting details and updates. If you remember, according to the previous videos, previous discussions, the Russians managed to establish control completely over the southwestern part of Marinka, and just this morning we discussed that the Russians completely established control over, let's say, north central part of the village. And today the Ukrainians published geolocations from their side. On this video we can see the video of 46 Air Mobile Brigade that was redeployed from Robotine in this area, and on this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians with FPV drones in the Marinka. This video took place here, very far from the combat line, but the rest part of the video took place on the northwestern part of Marinka, which confirms the significant Russian progress. We will not watch the video till the end due to losses from the Russian side. So the video includes the strikes in this area, and this area. So basically, according to the video that was provided by the Ukrainian forces, as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory. The morning progress we already discussed. Some Russian sources reported about the progress in the farms on the northern part of Marinka, and we got the geolocation. So as you can see, the Russians have almost completed the clearing operation on this territory. There are just few buildings along Ivano-Franko Street, and obviously the Russians are very fast. We see this, and obviously during the next few days and probably before the end of the year, the Russians will try to establish complete control over this territory as well. So this is like the minimal plan, the minimal goal from the Russian side. Furthermore, if the Russians are able to take under control this territory, they will try to attack more, and they have chances, very nice chances, to take under control this territory as well, because everything is connected. Every single foothold is in this area is connected, and if the Russians can complete with Marinka story, they will be able to complete with everything that located on the south. So what does it mean for the Ukrainians? Basically, if the Russians are able to do everything we just discussed, they will be able to get the operational space. And from that moment, the Russians will have complete initiative in their hands, and they will dictate the Ukrainians where they're going to attack next. The Russians do have possibilities to continue their offensive operation further in direction of Krasnogorovka. The Russians will probably try to attack the Ukrainians among the fields on the north of Georgievka, so the Russians can improve their positions and to get these water reservoirs and basically to collapse the Ukrainian positions. Furthermore, after the end of Marinka story, the Russians do have possibilities to attack between Pobeda and Georgievka, trying to get this N15 line. They will split the Ukrainian defense belt, and they basically will collapse the single defense configuration of Ukrainians in this area. Obviously, the Russians will continue attacks in direction of Pobeda. So this is exactly what I'm trying to say. This is operational space, and this is the flower of Marinka, and we see how the flower of Marinka can bloom. When talking about southern direction, the Russians currently try to dig in deeper. We haven't received any updates about any attempts to attack in direction of Pobeda. Maybe there were some attempts, but we haven't received even a single geolocated video. Maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow we're gonna receive some. But obviously, this is the next logical Russian direction to take Pobeda and also to improve and to increase the operational space for further offensive operation deep inside of these fields between Kurakhova, Uspenovka, Katerinovka, Konstantinovka, Maximilianovka. This might be complete collapse and disaster for the Ukrainians. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on the South Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers. The level of losses is not the highest, and the main reason of that is that during the previous days the Russians achieved significant results and they were digging in deeper during the previous 24 hours. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area and we have also a lot of updates. The Russians currently during the previous 24 hours made another attempt, or let's say the first attempt, to attack the Ukrainians in Pervomaiskaya, and for that purposes they used very interesting tactics. They moved along this water reservoir. At this point the Russians turned to the south and were trying to attack the Ukrainians behind them, behind their main forces that located on the edge positions in Pervomaiskaya. But something went wrong. The Ukrainians managed to discover the Russians, and as a result of FPV drone strikes the Russian forces were destroyed and were forced to step back. But anyway, now we see the main Russian plans. Now they want to encircle this salient and to create a cauldron for the Ukrainians on the edge positions in Marinka. Now we are moving to Avdiivka. We have lots of updates, and the most important updates are coming from the south, from industrial area. The video was published, the geolocated video was published by the Ukrainian sources. On this video we see a certain number of FPV drone strikes against the Russian infantry troops, stormtroopers, exactly in the vicinity of industrial zone and at some residential area. This video we're using to confirm the Russian presence along this street, along the Sinovata line and this residential area. So according to that video we can color the map, and we will color this video before the next video. The Russians managed to establish control over this territory. Now we can clear and we can color the territory and to update the map. The Russians, according to that video, were attacking the Ukrainians along the Sinovata line and along these forest lines, forest roads. Obviously, the Russians managed to attack and to develop their attack further deep inside of Avdiivka, but for now we haven't received any geolocation of that, so we will keep the map as is. When talking about, let's say, the first streets of Marinka like Kirova and Lermontova, but this part will be colored. When talking about northern direction, the situation in the vicinity of Stepova is not so good in comparison with the situation, let's say, in Marinka or Robotine or South Avdiivka. On this territory, the Russians can't break the situation in their favor. It's like 50-50 or even maybe in Ukrainian favor. On this video, we can see probably a very interesting scene of clashes between Ukrainian Bradley on the right side and Russian tank on the left, or maybe it's not a tank but it's armored vehicle. Anyway, there was like a very short distance battle between two armored vehicles. On this video we can't see who exactly won the battle. The Russians at some point took a decision not to risk. They basically turn their machine and withdraw their positions. But anyway, that was probably a very fantastic video. The Ukrainians published lots of videos from this territory. For example, on this scene we can see how the Russian armored vehicle was moving along the fields in Stepova. At some point the Russians got the minefields and basically there was a very heavy explosion and armored vehicle was destroyed. So we see that the Russians do have their presence here. They do have armored vehicles on the Ukrainian side of the railways, but the Russians also have significant losses. Yes, they have control, but they're paying too high price for this territory. But maybe this is the plan, maybe this is the strategical point of view, because from the other side the Ukrainians were forced to concentrate like 100 brigades, like 116th Brigade, like 47th Brigade, like 46th Brigade. Meanwhile, the Russians are pushing and get some success on other front lines. Also, we got another video from the Ukrainian side how they were evacuating damaged Bradley in the vicinity of Cheretina. This video is geolocated, as you can see. So this is the situation. The Ukrainians do have possibilities to evacuate and fix, repair armored vehicles, and then to return it back to the combat line. Now we are moving to Bakhmut Artyomov's direction. We also got a lot of updates from this territory. As you can see, the Russians intensified their activity in the vicinity of Avdiivka. The Russians were bombing heavily the Ukrainian forces and positions on the north of Avdiivka, on the south of Avdiivka, and this is the artillery preparation before the next steps and before the next attempt from the Russian side to force the Ukrainians to step back. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians completely focused on Klishchiivka. If you remember, during the previous days, the Ukrainians were defeated on the hill 215.7. Now the Ukrainians are under complete Russian fire control, and the Ukrainians need to do something. They need to find a solution how to force the Russians to step back, because the Ukrainian days in Klishchiivka are numbered. And during the previous day, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts trying to counterattack the Russians on the hill, but all the attempts were repelled by the Russians and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. Currently, the Russians save control over the hill. According to information we have, as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 125 soldiers. When talking about northern flank, we got few geolocations in this area. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the railway on the southwest from Pitomnik fortification, on the south of Bakhmut, Bogdanovka. This is the first steps of the clearing operation before further offensive operation from the Russian side along the railways. Before the next video, we will also adjust the map, because according to information we have, the Russians do have established control over this territory, and the Russians have improved their positions a little bit along the railways. So these territories will be updated before the next video. But when talking about Bogdanovka itself and any attempts to attack the hill on the north of the village, we haven't received anything. So as I understand, the Russians still haven't run this operation. They need more time to make some investigations, to make some reconnaissance operation, because even if the Russians are able to capture the hill, they will be forced to pay significant price for this territory either. When talking about Lyman Kupiansk direction, we haven't received a lot of updates, at least when talking about Lyman, just the Ministry of Defense report. According to information we have, as a result of clashes on Lyman area, the Ukrainians lost 255 soldiers. The level of losses as usually very heavy, but almost nothing about geolocations. This is probably the only geolocation we got, some FPV drone bombardment of Ukrainian forces, nothing special. And now we're moving to Kupiansk. The battle for Synkivka continues, and today we got another geolocated video. As you can see, I have updated the map. The Russians currently continue their digging in deeper process, yet they haven't received 100% sure stable foothold in this territory. The Ukrainians always counterattacks, and the main problem is not about the Ukrainian counterattacks. The most important problem is that the Russians don't have a lot of roads how they can send infantry in this part of Synkivka, and every single road that the Russians have is under complete fire control. For example, on this geolocated video of 14th Mechanized Brigade, we see how the Russians were sending more infantry and more forces inside of Synkivka, maybe to reinforce the Russian forces there, or maybe to continue offensive operation, but the Russian forces were discovered by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians start bombing them with artillery. So once again, every single road that goes to Synkivka is under complete Ukrainian fire control, and it's very difficult to improve their position there. The situation in Synkivka is almost the same as the situation in Stepova. If the Russians, let's say, wanted to have better positions and to reduce losses, obviously, first of all, they should have established control over something like this. And then the city would be half encircled, and there are going to be less problems from Ukrainian artillery. But the Russians haven't managed to do this, and now they do have problems. But anyway, they managed to enter, and they will continue their improvements. Furthermore, we got once again the Udaya diary, another day. The day started at 191 soldiers from losses from the Ukrainian side and ended at 198. So during the day, the Ukrainians lost 7 more people, 7 more soldiers as a result of work of one FPV drone operator. So we got the half of battalion, almost half of battalion. Tomorrow is going to be half a battalion, even more. So just for 30 days, the one soldier or maybe 2 soldiers managed to reduce Ukraine army for half a battalion. Significant numbers, obviously. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes to my Patreon. And have a good day. Bye bye.